Hey everyone, in this video today we're going to be installing adjustable suspension onto this Audi TTRS. If you haven't seen the other previous videos, check them out, link will be down in the description below. But today will be the install on the front and rear of the car, and I'll show you how that's done. Jacking up the car, you might have your own process on how you get this done. I like to use this purpose-built rubber adapter. This goes underneath here. So this just goes in here like so and prevents any damage because this is your factory jack point over here. So now coming to the rear, this is the part where you can easily jack it up. So underneath here, just there, that one here, you can just jack it up. That's a strengthened point. And if you're using a hoist, you can also use these 2 points over here. But since we're using a floor jack today, we'll be going off there, and then I'll be putting the vehicle on jack stands. So what I like to use is 2 trolley jacks. So I use one on this side, the left hand, and then I use one on the right hand side, and I do it simultaneously. If you do not have 2 trolley jacks, that's fine. You can just use the one and do each side individually. But that's just something I prefer to do. So I use 2 on either side. And it goes without saying, if you have not done this job before, take your time and make sure it's on a level ground. If you're not comfortable doing it, take it into a workshop, because this can be a bit dangerous. This is to do with your suspension, anything to do with suspension and brakes. Always make sure you do it perfectly the first time around. So this is the set of coilovers we're going to be using on the vehicle. It's the Yellow Speed Racing. After comparing a few others, I've decided to go with this one. They're quite high quality. They're built quite well, and they're fully adjustable. So just a quick look on them. I will do a review on them a bit later on once they're installed on the vehicle, and I'll let you know how they perform. So I'll show you what comes in the kit. So that was just the front shock I removed. These are your adjustable sway bar end links, which will go on the front. You get your set of spanners. You get your new coilover spring for the rear, and you get the adjustable mount, which allows you to adjust the ride height on the rear. So both the shock, because the shock is outboard and it's not inboard on the rear of the axle, you have this adjustable head for the spring, and finally you have an inverted style rear shock absorber. I like the inverted style because it allows you the ability to adjust your damper, so how stiff or how soft you want it. Just wire this part here just by turning this. So while installing the new shocks, you want to try and keep it as neutral as possible. So for the front and rear, so both for the front and rear, try and keep the height at 1. So adjust this, both of them, measure them up and keep them neutral in one position. For example, we'll just say we'll keep it at 200 just as an example. Set both of them up, and then when they're on the vehicle you can adjust it accordingly. So this is just an overview, and you get 2 rear shocks, 2 front shocks, 2 adjustable sway bar end links, 2 locking spanners, and finally that adjustable rear mount springs for the rear axle. So now I'll discuss and show you the tools that you require in order to complete this job. These are the tools you require when changing over to adjustable suspension or when doing any suspension work on an Audi or a VW. I'll start off with the torque wrenches. So I've got multiple torque wrenches here. You'll need one for torquing up the larger bolts to high torque, smaller one and a miniature one as well to torque up the smaller bolts various other places. You'll need long nose pliers, just standard pliers. It's just good practice to have these. Screwdrivers, markers, very important because you'll need to mark the camber adjustment on the front lower control arm. So on that lower ball joint, it allows you a little bit of adjustment. So you just want to mark it until you get it to the wheel alignment specialist, so you can drive it safely to get the alignment done. Next, moving on, these two are very important. If you start the job without these, you'll get stuck without them. This is a M14 triple square is what we call it. As you can see, I've got the whole complete rail here. It's quite useful to have, but if you just wanted the one, it's just a M14. You need a multi-point socket for the axle. This is a 30 or a 12-point socket. And then depending on which way you choose to open up your front knuckle or to separate your strut, you'll need a ball joint separator for your tie rod end. Power tools are good to have, normally makes the job a lot easier. You'll need a small ratchet set. It comes in use. You don't have to have it, but it does come in use. I would recommend having one. Then coming down here, you'll need a full ratchet set as seen here, something similar to this. You'll need a lot of sockets from about the 10 onwards, 10 to about 18 and then 21. You'll need a spanner set as well, so keep your spanners handy. You will need a few different types to get into a few different places. Then you can, depending on how you choose to proceed, if your one is stuck and you have to pull off the brake caliper, it's good to have a caliper spreader. So just a piston spreader, so you can separate the brake pads when reinstalling. Then I've got a universal strut spreader here. You'll see it later on in the video how it was used. You can choose to use this, or you can choose to use the factory VW tool. You should see a picture of that now. And finally, if this is not a must, but if you, depending on your setup and what you're going for, if you're going for fully adjustable or if you're going for a spring and shock setup, this is quite handy to have. This is specific for your shock absorbers. It's got the pass-through sockets here, and then you've got the locking hex tools or whatever you require. So that goes ahead and locks the strut so that the shock strut doesn't turn. That locks that in place, and then you can open the top lock nut. So this is quite good to have as well. Not a must, but depends on your kit, so just something to keep in mind as well. You'll also need Loctite 243, so make sure you buy this before you start the job. It's quite important. Just a basic overview of the tools. You might require a lot more tools, you might not require as many. It just depends on what your setup is. So like I said, this is just a brief overview. Watch throughout the video and I'll mention the different socket sizes and spanner sizes that I've used, so just keep that in mind. And also the torque settings, I'll be discussing that. Also, don't forget you'll need new bolts, so make sure you pre-order them specific to your application. This is the delete kit that I'm going to be using with the vehicle. If you watched my previous video, I spoke about using VCDS and how you can also code out the modules, but I've chosen to go this way because I want to be able to disable traction control, and I want the headlight, rain sensor and everything to operate as per normal, because the headlight will move up and down as per the level sensors, which you'll see later on in the video. So here we've got these two rear sensor delete kits, so that's what it looks like. This one's the rear one, indicated by the larger connector, and then these are the front delete kit modules. It's a nice design, and I'll show you where I got this from. So I've ordered this particular kit from the Asian garage. His customer service is really great. That's his instructions, and that's his channel as well, I believe. I'll leave a link down in the description below, and you can go down and refer to it, and you can possibly order the kits yourself. It's not sponsored or anything. I just chose to go for these kits after hearing about the problems with the KW kit and how they burn out over time. So I'll be installing these, and I'll do another review later on once everything's up and running. Okay, so now we're going to loosen the axle nut. You can get someone in the passenger seat to press the brake pedal, and once they press the brake pedal, then we can go ahead and loosen this. This is torqued to over 200 Newton meters, so it's very tight. I'll also be using an extension pole or a cheater bar just to get extra leverage on it. So make sure it's secure in there. And like I said earlier, it's always good to mark it. So now you can see it's already loosened. It's loosened by about 20 degrees. You can do this with the wheel on the ground, but you're not supposed to open it more than 90 degrees when the wheel is on the ground. So now it's loose. This extra mark you see here was for the angle. So when we torque it down, we'll torque it down to 200 Newton meters and then go plus the degrees, which I'll discuss a bit later. So now that's done, we'll go ahead and open the rest of the parts like I showed you earlier. So now we'll proceed to opening the lower control, the lower ball joint. And as you can see, I've marked everything. So don't forget to soak all of this. Spray this whole strut down with CRC or WD-40 so it soaks in there and it'll make your life a lot easier when you soak it. Now that we have all of that removed, the axle nut, the strut pinch bolt over there, and the lower ball joint just there, go ahead and remove. It's a bit hard doing it one-handed, but you get the idea. You go ahead and remove that. Then we'll push the axle back and we'll just support it, make sure it doesn't hang. And finally, don't forget that level sensor. We'll just go underneath and just disconnect that. So when you've removed that lock nut from the bottom, just remove the level sensor. Be careful. Don't damage this. This is an expensive part. So just move this aside. And now we'll open up the sway bar end link. Just be careful, there could be tension on this sway bar end link depending on how you have jacked up your vehicle and if it's on a level ground or not, so just keep that in mind as well. You can keep the nut in there now that it's loose, and we'll just do the same on the top there, and we'll push the axle up. So as you can see, I'm just holding it in with the hex 5mm hex tool, or Allen. You can use a 5mm Allen key or Allen wrench, whatever you call it. So this is the bolt setup for your lower control ball joint. So just keep that aside. That's been removed. Once that's removed, we'll pull this forward and push this axle. I think this is stopping. So it was proving to be too difficult to remove it there. The strut was jammed on the knuckle, so we just brought it on the bench. So now that we've got the shock out, I'll just go ahead and just give this a clean, just a little bit of a wipe down. If yours is rusty, then you can give it a little bit of a clean with using a wire brush. So as you can see here, everything has been removed. Now coming to the top here, this is what the strut tower looks like, and we'll just be doing a dry fit using the shock. So just putting the new shock in there. It's very important to get the camber adjustment correct, so just keep that in mind as well. That's why we're doing just a dry fit. So as you can see here, the dry fit shows that the camber's put in correctly. So the camber plate will adjust the wheel in and out as intended. So I'll just mark it, so then we can put it back in the same orientation. So I'll just show you here. That's what it looks like. The new shock is in place. Just go ahead and give all this a clean. Another thing I was not able to show you on the car because it was too difficult is this ABS sensor here. I disconnected it. It's just a push type connector. I'll show you that on the car because you'll have to remove that as well. So when you come to separating your knuckle, you can use the factory VW tool, which I'll put up a picture now. You'll see what that tool is. Otherwise, you can use this universal type kit. You should be able to get this from your automotive stores. So it comes with these two adapters. What you need to do is put the adapters in here. These two pieces go into your strut assembly or your hub assembly. And they've got grub screws here where you tighten. So this one goes here. This one goes here. Just like that. What you want to do is take your Allen key, tighten this up here, tighten this all four. Pick your spreader tool, so you'll have multiple different choices, or if you just have the one. So this tool goes in here, in between, and this is the push rod, you could say. So this screws in from here at the back. So I'll show you off the car first. So this screws in here. That goes in there. This one goes here. You can put that there. Put this one here. So that's what it looks like. And then when you force this in, when you tighten it and force it in, make sure these pins are out. You just keep forcing it, and then eventually this one here, it'll go in there, wedge itself in there and spread the hub assembly, so it'll split this up a bit. This is commonly used on BMWs, Audis, VWs. So this is a universal type kit. If you wanted to opt for this type, you can use it. So you can tighten it and make sure you pick the right spreader. Once you're done, just unscrew it here, unscrew the grub screws, and then just pull it out. So that's how that one works. Otherwise, like I said, you can use the factory VW tool, which you'll see again now. So now I have to go 90 degrees, so if we mark this here, it has to end up till about there. So roughly 90 degrees is here, 180, and then this goes another 90, so 90, we'll have to torque it down there. Okay, that's 90 degrees. And now we'll go ahead and put the tie rod back in. So we popped this out using a splitter, just a tie rod splitter. If you don't know how to use this, watch my other video on the Subaru. When we removed the axle, we did the same process there. So this is the ABS sensor connector that I was talking about earlier. Now how this works is, if I show you here, all you want to do is get in here and just push up like so. So looking at the connector from this side, pull back on it. So just pull back. It's a different type of connector if you're used to Japanese cars, because that normally you just push down, but this one you have to pull it back. So just to make it a little bit more clearer, you can put a screwdriver in here and just twist it back like so. When you twist it back, hopefully you can see that it just lifts it up. So that's how this connector works. Okay, so now we're going to be putting the wheel back on in order to torque the axle nut to specification. You can't tighten it without the whole car being dropped and level. Okay, so now we're torquing it down to 200 Newton meters, and then we'll go 180 degrees. It's 200. And I've got a marker here. So I have to go 180 degrees. So from here, I essentially have to just come about to here. And that'll be 180 degrees of torque applied. So now if we come here, so it was 200 Newton meters and then one whole rotation to 180. 180 degrees. That's why you have to drop the wheel on the ground before torquing this down, because it's a lot of force on this, on the bolt. These shocks are a different height to the factory OEM ones. So now I'm just taking the measurements. So I've re-jacked up the vehicle, taken off the wheels, and we're just resetting approximate height. You will still need to take it in for a full wheel alignment, but this is needed in order to set the sway bar inlets, the adjustable sway bars. In order to set this now, we have to set this height. And then we'll have to drop the vehicle again and then get this sway bar to a neutral position and then put the sway bar end link in. I've installed the other side fully, it's just this side is not installed. So you take the measurement from center to top. It's about 42.5 on this side. And it's the same on the other side. 42.5. We'll leave it at this. We'll just temporarily lock this bottom collar in on both sides, put the wheels back on and then drop it again. And then we'll check the height once the suspension settles again. Once you have your ride height established and you're happy with that, you can go ahead and lock this in. So use your larger spanner to come here and just hold this here and then just tighten this, the bottom lock ring. This is why I said I prefer this type of suspension, because it's a body type adjustment and not just spring adjusted. So you set your spring preload, which is already set from factory, and all you're doing is adjusting the height, which gives you a better ride. So it's a more comfortable ride. You don't need to go super tight on it. Just tighten it and then take it for a drive once you're done. And then you come back here and then you check it and then you can tighten it further. So this is the delete kit that we've got. This is the delete kit. So this is the module. It just goes here. And I'll be mounting it there. And I'll be running the wiring through this wheel arch, the wheel lining here, and it'll come out from the top there. So I'll just be pulling this forward and running this at the back. Once it's all done, I'll show you how it looks. So this is how I mounted the delete kit. As you can see, it's almost factory looking. I mounted it just there, and I've run the wire, as I discussed earlier, straight through from the top there, and it just loops from there. So that's the passenger side, and I'll show you the driver's side. So now we're on to the driver's side. And again, here you can see how it loops through. It's tucked away from everything. It's just mounted there. So it gets good amount of cooling as well from here. And that's what it looks like now with everything buttoned up. Now we're tightening up the top strut mounts. So what you want to do is torque this down to 15 Newton meters. And then we want to go a further 90 degrees on it. So we'll mark it, and then I'll go 90 degrees. So as you can see, I've marked it about here. So we want to go 90 degrees. So just about till about here on each one of them. So now that we got the wheel off, I'll quickly run you through the procedure on removing the rear shock and spring. So this is the bolt here we'll be removing that mounts the shock to the hub here. We'll be opening this bolt down here, which is part of the lower control arm. Then coming around to the front, very important, do not forget this. Very important, do not forget your ride height or level sensor just over there. Make sure you remove those two bolts and disconnect that before proceeding with dropping the lower control arm. And then finally we have to take out the inner guard or the wheel lining. They're just held in by Torx bits here, T25 for memory, all around there, and a couple of plastic nuts, 10 mm here, and finally you have one clip just over here. So once you take all of that off, then you'll have access to the top strut mount over here and the connector for your mag ride shock and the two bolts, and that's how you can pull it out from there. And also remember, all of these are torque to yield bolts, so you might want to get replacements, and you also want to do the final tightening of all the bolts here and there. You want to tighten it when the vehicle's on the ground and when the bushing is fully loaded. This clip here, it'll be flush mount like that. All you have to do is get a small screwdriver and just push it in a little tiny bit. Just push it in like so, and then this just allows it to compress down. And then when you're reinstalling it, just hold it like, put it like that, and then you can just push it in, and then it just locks in place. So like I've said previously, always mark your bolts, whether you or not you're going to reuse it or get new ones. It's always a good habit to get into, so we'll just go ahead and mark these two, and then we'll take it off. And as you can see, I've already done that, as you would have seen previously. That's already done on both sides, here, here and there. This connector here, if you're not familiar with this type of VW Audi connector, all you have to do is get in there and just pull back. So it's not a press down connector, it's a pull back connector. Just be very careful because they do break. Similar to the ABS type connector. So you get in there and you just pull back on it, pull back and down. Just to show you again, this is the connector removed. When I pull back, notice how it lifts up. So that's all you want to do, just pull back on the connector. So this is just an 18mm socket that I'm using here and a spanner on the other end. And we'll keep that bolt loosely in there for now until we loosen up the shock. So with the 21mm spanner, I find it works the best over here at the back. You can use a power bar as well in a 21, or what you can do if you're finding it too difficult, drop this lower control arm, remove the spring, then you'll have easy access to torque down or to open up the suspension lower strut bolt. So the shock absorber, the lower bolt. That's fairly self-explanatory, so I'll go ahead and remove the bolts and I'll show you the next procedure. So before dropping your lower control arm, make sure you support it with the jack because there's a lot of spring tension here. So just support it and then in a controlled manner drop it down. And like I said, don't forget your level sensor is very important. So we're just going to go ahead now and just open that. Just marked it just so that it can be torqued down. to the same specification. The level sensor, it's got a maximum, it's got a stop in it, so it will only go so far. I don't know if I can show you that, but on the sensor itself, you can see that bump stop. There's a stop there, so it won't go any further. And that's the reason why if the control arm drops any further, you will break that plastic strut there. So yeah, that's why we disconnected, so don't forget that, very important. Now we've supported the lower control arm, so let's remove the bolt and the nut. So I'd mark both the nut side and the bolt side. You can loosen up the shock, or you can drop the jack down now slowly and just watch the spring, so it'll remove the pressure off the spring. But just note that these shocks are going to be bent, so it's fine to do this. But if you're going to be reusing your shocks, don't do this, because you might overextend your shock. So as you can see now, there's no tension on the control arm. And now once you're sure that there's no spring tension on the coil spring, then you can go ahead and drop the jack, move it out of the way. You can just remove the spring. It comes in two parts, the top insulator and the bottom insulator. We'll discuss this a bit later. Now you have clear access to the lower bolt, which is a 21. When you pull out this bolt, make sure you get this washer. This washer goes in between here. So this washer goes here, the bolt goes through this side. It's just a locking tab washer, so just remember that, very important. Don't forget that. The top strut mount is held on by two 16mm bolts, so you need a 16mm socket. I like to loosen it first and then I'll use the gun on it. And you can see here on this shock here, there was some obvious rubbing here, and this would have been where the oil would have leaked out at one stage. Anyway, we'll take this to the bench now and we'll transfer over the items. So now we'll proceed to taking off the top cover of this magnetic shock. So take that off there, and this essentially just pulls out like so. And now this is the tricky part, it's this connector here. If you plan on reusing it, you're not supposed to. According to Audi, you have to replace this whole unit, and it's several $100s just to replace this unit. But if you're careful and you don't break this over here, if you don't break that here, you can carefully try and pry it up with the screwdriver. I mean, so just like that. I've just clicked off on that side, and now we'll just have to click it off on the other side. So you can kind of get it intact. How good they are to reuse them, I'm not 100% sure. So just if you want an explanation on this one of these. So if you look here, this is another one we just as an example. You have a positive and a negative here. So your negative would be the body here, and your positives inside there. So looking at this one, which is a lot cleaner, there's your positive and there's your negative, and that relates to these two wires over here. So if you look at the shock, this whole shock body is negative, and internally in there is the positive. And now as you can see, we've removed it. Now we just have to take this 16mm nut off. If you're not worried about the shocks, you can just go ahead and use your impact gun and just impact it off. Otherwise you will have to use a special tool and mount the shaft of the shock in a vise and just clamp it down so it doesn't spin on you. So we'll have to mount it in the vise now. Just lock the shaft in and then we'll open it from the top. Okay. And now once you get the top mount out, if you're reusing the top mount, you want to go ahead and just pull out this broken bump stop. And then underneath here is there's a washer there, so you just have to reuse this on the new shock. This is the part number, in case anyone else needs it. It's a 3CO part number, so it's used on a lot of other different vehicles for the top strut mount for an Audi TT. Go on ahead and set this shock absorber. So if we measure the two up here, I brought it within spec of each other. So you want to replicate this a similar thing, depending on what your application is and what you're going for. So I've brought it to almost the same height. It's just a little bit lower because we're going a little bit lower on this setup at the moment. So ensure you set this up to your old shock, very important. I also did the same for the high-low kit, which I'll show you soon. Now that that's done, don't forget your washer. Slip that here at the top, just goes in there. Then your top strut goes in here. This can swivel around later on, so you can get the right orientation now if you wanted to, and just tighten it that way. And then use your new lock nut. This is an inverted type of a shock absorber, so notice here the shaft is here. This is just a fixed mount at the top, so there's nothing to hold as such. So I'll just go ahead and torque this down to 25 Newton meters. It's the new nut, depending on what coilover setup you go for. This new nut is a 17. So I'm not going to rattle it in. That was just initially just to put it in, and now I'll just torque it down with my torque wrench to 25 Newton meters. And that's set to 25 Newton meters. And now this one is good to go in the vehicle. So the extended length with no load on the suspension of the shock absorber between this part and this part, so the exposed shaft, is roughly about 124 millimeters. Just for my reference, 124. And then we'll calculate the shock or the shaft distance once we have it in the vehicle. So this is what it looks like now with the adjustable shock mounted to the top mount here. You can check your top mount just by moving it back and forth side to side if there's any excessive play on it. And this one is within spec and it's perfect. This is the old spring, and just for reference in case anyone else needs it, notice the isolator at the bottom, the rubber isolator. Notice how it's got the notch and it goes to the end perfectly with the coil spring. Similarly at the top here, you've got the other isolator, and this one just slots in there like so. So we'll be transferring over both of these onto the new spring, which I'll show you now. This is the high-low kit that I was referring to. This compensates for the new spring, because the new spring is shorter and this is adjustable. I've gone ahead and adjusted it. So as I was explaining earlier, we've got the OEM spring here, and we've got the new aftermarket spring here that comes as part of the coilover setup. So if I put them side by side, you can see the clear difference in height. That's where this high-low adjuster comes in. So if I bring these two up here, you can see I've gone ahead and adjusted it already. So this is similar in height to the old spring. The spring rate on the new ones it's a little bit stiffer than the old one, so hence why I've left a little bit. So this one's gone a little bit lower than this one, because this one would have compressed a bit more as soon as load was applied. So based on my calculation, this should be nearly identical to the factory spring with a little bit of a lowered look to it. So that's how you set that up. Take the measurement from the bottom here, and you can set up your other one exactly the same, left and right. Then you've got this isolator, which you can choose to put, or if you don't want to put it, you don't want to put it, at the bottom. And you've got this one up here that just clips in here at the top, like so. And now we'll go ahead and put the new spring setup back in the vehicle. Also, another thing with this high-low kit, depends on your coilover setup and what you get. This one's got this mount here, so this gets mounted to the lower control arm from the bottom. So imagine that this is the control arm in between. This goes in between here and just mounts to there. So this is always secured there to the lower control arm. So I've gone ahead and clipped the isolator or the rubber mount, the bottom mount, onto here, the factory one. It's got a locating pin here, so we'll go ahead and put that in the lower control arm. So this is that bolt I was talking about. It goes from the bottom here of the control arm. So now I'll go ahead and put the shock in. I've not put the spring in yet because it just makes life a little bit easier. And I've also not done the final tightening on the shock either. Got the bolt here, don't forget the washer. So this one here has just got two inner shims, you could say. So that's why I just have to cut that cable tie off. We'll just go ahead and put the bolt here. So that's tight, but that's not. You want to keep all these loose. It just should be finger tight, because we'll be dropping the vehicle and then doing the final torque with it fully loaded. Spring is here. Make sure the spring top mounts seats in here. Put the control arm back up. And essentially what you have to do is you have to line this up again and put the bolt in. Make sure you get the orientation right. Bolt goes through this way and nut goes in the other way. Make sure you get the bolt in this way and the nut on the other side, otherwise you won't be able to pull out the bolt from the, if you put it the wrong way around. So now we're going to torque down the top strut to 50 Newton meters and then 45 degrees. This will be about your 0. Here's about 90, so we want it about just about there. And similarly over here, want it just about there. Just a fraction more. That's about it, 45 and about 45. So now we're going 90 Newton meters on the lower control arm bolt. So this is 90, this one's 70 on the shock lower bolt, the mount. That's 70. And that's 70 Newton meters and 180 degrees. Further, we have to tighten it. This is 90 Newton meters and 90 degrees we have to torque it down to. So that's 90 Newton meters. Once that's done, I'll just mark it and I'll torque it down a further 90 degrees. So now hopefully you can see the vehicle's on the ground now at the moment. We're going ahead and torqued the lower control arm bolt So now we have to go over the further 90 degrees. So you can see I've marked it where it should land up, or where it should end up. We've got to do that. And like I said, we've got some ramps here. And so all the weight's on the suspension bolts. And that's when you want before tightening it up finally. So now that we had dropped the car down, torqued all the bolts, suspension bolts with the suspension on load, now we're going to jack up the vehicle again. I'm just going to do final checks both left and right on the right hand side, and I'm going to install the rear mag right delete kits on this side and on the other side as well. Here you can see that I've set up the mag right system over here just using cable ties, and I've tied down the connector at the top there. Just over there I pulled it through the loom. This will be neatly mounted behind the wheel liner, so that's all good on that setup. As you can see here, I've just opened up this ring over here because we're going to adjust the ride height. I've taken it for a drive and it's not sitting exactly where I'd like it to sit, so I'm just going to readjust that. So what you want to do is, the rears you can't really use the locking spanner, you just need to get a screwdriver. I just put a bit of tape here just to soften up the blow, and then you can just hit this and you open this up from what you initially set it up to. Drop it down to what height you roughly want to go. I've got a straight edge ruler here, so I just measure it from the locking ring and I take a reference point from here. Your suspension might be different. Whatever you choose as your reference point, you can use that. So I want to drop it by about that much there, so that's how far I want to go. So I know roughly that's about the height I want to go. All I do then, I turn the shock. So this shock absorber goes into the body because these two are separate parts. By doing that, what this does is the shock, essentially it pulls the wheel up a little bit and it loads up the spring a little bit more as well for the suspension travel, for the shock travel as well. So that's something you want to factor in as well. This being an externally mounted shock absorber as opposed to a coilover setup with the spring and the shock together. So once you have it at your height, take a measurement again, and once you're happy with that, just go ahead and lock this in. Yeah, once you're happy with that, then all you want to do is just take your screwdriver and just tap it here, and just lock it in. One. Just like that. You can go around here and just tap it again and then tap it, and then you just lock that in there. Make sure that's tight, but you don't have to go excessively tight. It should just be tight to the point where it won't open. About that. So tighten it up. And like I said, this is after the test drive, so I've gone ahead and checked all the bolts again. I've checked the mounting bolts at the bottom, the lower control arm. So we've checked the shock mount here, we've checked the lower control arm bolt here. All my markings are still perfect, so all that's just lined up perfectly. So now I'll go ahead and put the Fender Liner back in. The easiest way I find to put the Fender Liner back in is just use the two stubs. There's one on either end, one there and the other one just here at the front. Just use that to line up the fender liner, then you can go ahead and put all the bolts back in. So this is the factory end link. Try and measure up the old one as close to this as possible, but also factor in if you've got your height adjustment. If you're going low on the car, you want this to be a little bit shorter, as this one is. So always the best indicator is to do it this way, and also make sure the car is lowered to the ground. And this sway bar is in a neutral position. I'll show you that underneath the vehicle. So here's the sway bar. It's a bit hard to show you because the whole car is lowered down and the weight's on the suspension. But notice the sway bar. So watch this with 2 fingers. I'm able just to move it. So this is called a neutral position. And you want to maintain this position as long as the car is facing straight and it's on a level ground. You want it to be in a neutral position. Your sway bar end link will just literally just slip in place and just goes in easily. So that's what you want. Always try and make sure it's in a neutral position so you can slot this in really easily. So just a recap, sway bar, with 2 fingers you should be able to just move it. It should have play in it, that indicates it's in a neutral position. And that's how you want to set your sway bar end links to that particular height. If you don't have an old factory one to go off, you can put the car down on a level ground and then measure it this way and then put in your sway bar end links. And then you must tighten the bolts with the weight on the ground. So when the vehicle's on the ground, then only you can tighten up the ball joints of the sway bar end links. So now what we've done is we're going lock to lock on both sides of the wheel. Whenever you install adjustable suspension, it's always a good idea to go turn the wheel to the full extreme on both sides. And you want to come underneath here and just check your sway bar links, check your shocks, check everything around here. Make sure nothing is touching or nothing is hitting. Check all your sensor wiring again. And as you can see here, I've just used a set of 3 blocks just to get that height in order to torque down all the suspension bolts. So now we're on the other side, and even here you can just check everything. So now coming to the passenger side, again you want to check for clearance between your drive shaft, your sway bar end links, and just check all your bolts. Go through and just check everything again. Make sure you put your ride height, your level sensors and everything back in place. And like I said, make sure you've put all your wheel speed sensors and everything back in as well. If for some reason you put on the ignition when any of these are disconnected, you just have to clear the codes and just try it again. And as you can see here, there's the mag right delete kit on the front. That's what it looks like with everything bolted in. Almost looks factory, and I've tucked up the wiring and everything there. Now that it's all completed, I've just started the car. No check engine light or no warning lights on the dash. Nothing for the magnetic ride suspension. I can still activate sport mode. So I'll just take it for a drive now and just check how the suspension rides. I'll bring it back and then we'll go ahead and just check all the bolts again for tightness. So thanks for watching, everyone. I hope this video was of some help to you. I've driven the car for about 150 kilometers now, so this is just a quick report back. The car handles excellent. The ride quality is a little bit harsher now because I don't have the ability to go to comfort mode anymore. However, in saying that, as you would have seen initially in the video, I can set the shocks so I can adjust the dampers on it. So that's always there, so that's not a big problem. But overall, the handling of the car is excellent now. It's predictable and it's a lot better, and it's a lot similar to other sports cars I've driven over the years. So I'd definitely say it's well worth the upgrade and getting rid of the mag ride system. If you can, and if you want to opt for the genuine shocks, then I suppose you can. And that should restore the ride quality again. But for my case, the adjustable suspension has worked well. And everything is functioning as per normal, including the headlights. So that still goes up and down as per the level sensors, and the sports button out over here, down here. The sports button, everything works perfectly fine. So the mag right delete kit has worked well, and there's no issues to report. So I will do another follow-up video a bit later on both the suspension and the mag right kit, and I'll give you a little bit of an update once it's been a few months. So stay tuned for that. I would appreciate if you could give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. It did take some time to make this video. It took a good few weeks to actually process everything. There was a lot of footage. I've compressed everything down as much as I could, but it's still quite a long video, as you would have seen, but hopefully it's of some help to you because it's quite in depth. So thanks for watching, everyone, and like I said, don't forget to give it a like. See ya.